right. So my name is Andrea. I work at Story. And today I want to talk to you about intellectual property and what we're doing at Story to help make it more programmable. If you have questions or you want to reach out, then just reach out to me on Telegram or Twitter at Devrelius. And let's just dive right into it. Let me start my stopwatch. Okay. So IP, not the verb, but the noun, intellectual property. There's so many different aspects of IP, and in Web3 we have a lot of native IPs, but if you really think about it, IP is everywhere. Everything that we create with our minds, more or less, can become intellectual property. But today, the threshold for considering something intellectual property is quite high because it's pretty complex to register, it's complex to license, it's complex to negotiate, and only those that have lawyers, legal teams, really are able to, call their things intellectual property. But we want to change that. Because if you think about it today, there are amazing distribution channels where everyone who can create anything can become more or less famous overnight, right? TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. It's not a question of can you find something anymore. It's a question of who has the best content. And so everyone can become a creator and everyone has access to the world. And at the same time, and this is a debatable philosophical question, you don't even need to be an amazing artist to create things anymore, right? Everything is one prompt away. This is an example from Sora, where there's 2 puppies playing in the snow, or 3 puppies. This is completely AI generated, and I'm sure this is going to get better and better over time. So we have amazing godlike tools, we have amazing distribution channels, and it doesn't really feel like we're in a digital renaissance, right? It actually feels like we're in a vicious cycle where the models are gobbling everything up and making it easy for anyone to create anything, but it's coming at the cost of creators. It's coming at the cost of who has put their time and effort into creating original works. And we believe at Story, and this is the whole reason why we're building Story, that this main failure point is at the intellectual property level. Because today, we are applying medieval systems to very modern problems. And what do I mean by medieval systems? The current copyright system came about with the printing press. So before, like we studied in history in class, if you wanted to copy a book, you needed to copy it by hand, right? There was like the monks who would copy each book by hand. And then came about the printing press that basically just was a cheat code, and they could print out and churn out thousands of copies of the same book. So the authors behind those books didn't really have a way to protect themselves. And so the copyright law came about as the IP layer to protect the authors who created those works, right? And that enabled works like Shakespeare, like Charles Dickens, like Dante, like authors that we may love or hate, but it really allowed everyone to create original works and not worry about, is this going to get stolen? However, as you can see, the copyright law is very, very antiquated, and it's struggling to keep up with social media, with internet remixing, and we haven't even touched the whole AI layer, right? So it's becoming an exponential creation of content, and the copyright system is still at the printing press layer. And there's 3 main failure points that I want to talk to you today. The first one is that intellectual property is single player nowadays and still not multiplayer. The second one is that it's static and not programmable. And the third one is that it's locked and not liquid. And we love liquidity, as you just heard in the previous talk. So let's talk about them in order. So IP is single player and not multiplayer. Today, it really is a top-down approach to intellectual property. The bigger an IP becomes, the harder it is to access it. The bigger resources you need on either end in order to negotiate deals, in order to license things, and this kind of precludes all of the small players from playing with the biggest IPs. I used to work at Dapper Labs, and I kind of considered Dapper as a IP company because when they came out with NBA Top Shot, it really was all about the IP. And the reason, and the graph that you see there is like the evolution of the activity of Top Shot. As you can see, it's not a pretty graph. And I'm very much convinced that a determining factor that really stifled and constrained the growth of Top Shot, of course the market was a factor, of course there was other things. I'm not trying to say that it was all part of this, but a big factor was anyone who wanted to do anything with the Top Shot IP could not. They were literally blocked from doing anything, right? So no ecosystem was being created, even though thousands of people came to Dapper saying, hey, can I build a game? Can I build a trading card? Can I do this? Can I do that? And just because the IP was very, they were negotiated with the NBA, with the NFL, and everything was locked down. And that really precluded anyone else from being able to permissionlessly license and do things with it. So IP is becoming, or is still very much single player, and we need to make it multiplayer. We need to have many-to-many relationships when it comes to licensing and reusing IP. Then the second market failure is IP is static and not programmable. Right now, if you want to do something with IP, right, what you need to do is you need to know the person that has connections with whoever has the IP. You need to bring your lawyers, you need to sit down with their lawyers, you need to have a meeting, or possibly a lot of meetings, and discuss, and negotiate, and manually come to terms with this is what I need to do, or this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. As you can imagine, this is a very static and very manual process. So if in the age of the internet, when thousands or millions of people want to remix your content, want to go crazy with what you've created, it would be inconceivable for them to do it legally, because they would need to contact you, they would need to be, assuming you're a big IP holder, right? So how do we change that? We'll talk about it, but we already see this system breaking at the seams. These are two very classic examples that happened recently. Like the fashion show with famous actors that was AI generated. The famous Drake song, Heart on My Sleeve, that was created by someone called Ghostwriter. And he sung the song, but then changed his vocals to sound like Drake. It became, one of the top songs on Spotify, millions and millions of streams, but no one got anything from it because Drake's label took it down immediately. Ghostwriter didn't get anything, Drake didn't get anything, whereas it could have been a win-win solution if there had been some licensing deals in place, but there was just no structure in place, and IP holders today kind of default to no, you can't do this, you can't touch my IP. And this is like my personal take on it, is I think people tend to follow the path of least resistance. And this applies to everything, right? When it comes to doing something the legal way or the illegal way or the easy way or the hard way, everyone will follow the path of least resistance. And IP is still in that Napster moment. If you're old enough to remember, when we wanted to listen to a song or watch a movie, truthfully, the easiest way to do it was, especially like 10, 15 years ago, was to go on a mule, was to go on BitTorrent, was to go on LimeWire, and just download it. It was just easier, right? Rather than having to go to the video store and rent a movie and then remember to bring it back, hoping that it was available. But now, with Netflix, with Prime Video, with Spotify, with Apple TV, the fact that we have 10,000 subscriptions is also pretty shit, I'll say that. But the fact that we have instant access to content legally, it makes it much easier to do the legal thing, right? Versus the illegal thing. Or at least you have less reasons to go and stream something. And so IP really needs to, move past the Napster moment and turn into something where the easy way to license IP is the legal way, right? if you want to reuse something that someone created, it's just easier to license it than it is to just copy and paste it. That's the ideal scenario. Because we can try erecting walls and making it harder and harder to, copy stuff, but people are going to do it anyways. So it's not a matter of creating more walls, it's a matter of how do we destroy all the walls that are around it so that people can follow the right paths. And it's not just people, companies also follow the path of least resistance. For example, the New York Times had to sue OpenAI because they were just crawling and eating up everything that was written by the journalists. And you may think, oh, that's not too big of a deal. But the problem is, if all of that content is being swooped up by OpenAI, and people start asking OpenAI or ChatGPT questions, and the questions are good enough, people will stop going to the original sources, right? And so the original sources will have less and less traffic and less reasons to create things. And big companies were able or have the resources to sue OpenAI. For example, Reddit, has a data deal with OpenAI where they get millions of dollars a year for all of your data. But individual creators, like for example a blogger, they don't have that negotiating power, they don't have those resources to get those same deals, right? And if Perplexity suddenly starts giving everyone the recommendations that you worked so hard to write up, no one's going to come to your blog anymore. And you're not going to be incentivized to write the blog. And it's just going to be like a vicious cycle where, it's something that we call the tragedy of the commons, right? If everyone eats up all of the grass, then there's going to be no grass left for anyone, and everyone will die. It's basically like a game theory where everyone loses. This is a depiction of it. And the third market failure, and we'll get to fixing it, don't worry, is IP is locked and not liquid. Now, we love liquidity in Web3. And basically what we need to do is, like Bitcoin made or brought money and made it decentralized, like Ethereum made money programmable, we need to do the same thing with IP. We need to bring that massive trillion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar asset class and make it programmable, make it easy to transact on, make it easy to tokenize, to collateralize. And the only way to do that is to obviously bring it on chain. Just in the US, IP is worth like $5 trillion. So it's a massive, massive opportunity. And the good thing about IP, instead of regular financial assets, right? Obviously everyone's happy when financial assets go up, but the difference between financial assets and IP is that people have an emotional connection with IP. The value comes later, right? You go watch a movie because you like the characters in it. You don't go watch a movie because you think the number's gonna go up, right? And so if you consider that every IP in the world has this untapped, or I mean it's being tapped, but being tapped by, very manually value, what if other people could transact on it? What if it could become liquid for others to speculate on, to trade on, or even to collateralize, right? You have a valuable IP and you can put it up and lend it for something. All of that is possible, but it's just not possible today, unless you do things very, very manually and you have very, very long meetings with lawyers. So let's look at these market failures and how we're addressing it with Story. I mean, spoiler alert, right? How do we fix this situation where social media and co-creation and generative AI is not allowing the copyright law to keep up? We need a new solution, right? And that's what we're trying to build. And that's why Story exists. Like I said, we need to move past and do what Bitcoin and Ethereum did for money, we need to do for IP, right? And the way that we do that is by turning every IP into a programmable Lego. So what if every single piece of media and content that is being created encapsulated itself the metadata associated to, hey, what are the license terms in order to use it? What are the royalty flows, and how do you pay those royalty flows if you do license my content, whether on-chain or off-chain, right? So let's say you have a piece of IP and I want to I want to create a merch line. That's fine because the license is legally binding everywhere. But we need to make it easy for people to find that license, for people to be able to create a license and be able to use it. So we need to move from static JPEG to programmable IP Lego. And by having every single piece of media be registered, it allows that media to be composable across different applications. And I'll show you a practical example in just a second. But you don't need to worry about having it live in a single platform, right? Because if a single platform controls the whole flow, the end-to-end flow, then you can do that already. But what if you want to take one piece of media from one application and transport it into another one and go from on-chain to off-chain or from off-chain to on-chain? You need that metadata, you need those license terms to be persistent and to be applicable across mediums. So we'll see a practical example of it, but the core value on Lock of Story is by doing this, by turning every IP into programmable IP Lego, suddenly IP becomes multiplayer. Anyone can remix any other person's IP. And the terms are upfront. You don't need to have meetings. You don't need to negotiate. You set the terms that you want as the IP holder, and people can come up and mint licenses and use those licenses to create derivative works. And everything is done permissionlessly. And by doing that, we tap into the real value, which is the network, right? The real value of all of the biggest applications today is not so much what they do, but it's the network that they have within themselves that basically has huge network effects. And we go from a model of I have the IP and I control everything about the IP to, a bit like the Disney model, to more like a Linux model where someone creates a piece of IP and it can flourish in so many different mediums and so many different interpretations without having the original author be, forgotten or sacrificed. And things like the music hit by Drake, right, where he unfortunately took down the song "Heart on My Sleeve." It can make something like what Grimes did. So Grimes responded to this thing saying, hey, I'll split 50% royalties on any successful AI-generated songs that uses my voice, right? She can do that already on Story by just registering her voice as an IP and setting the license terms, for example, 50% royalty splits, and anyone can come and mint a license, and that license is legally binding both on-chain and off-chain. So it's a way to enforce, but also to officialize these types of agreements in an easy way. And then, of course, we need to make Story, or we need to make IP liquid, right, as I was saying. And that's why we are thinking a lot about how do we apply all of the things that we learned with DeFi, right, which is more or less the strongest product market fit of crypto so far, let's be honest. And how do we apply those same things to a new asset class, to IP, right? For example, the IP itself can be collateralized, can be borrowed and lent. The licenses to use the IP can be traded and collateralized or fractionalized or whatever. The royalty tokens that entitle you to a portion of the royalties from using that IP, are ERC20s that can be traded and bought and sold as well. So all of the core primitives, and by the way, on Story, the licenses are ERC721, so it's a very composable system with the existing primitives in place of DeFi. So there's four main components, and I'll go very, very quickly. There's the L1. We didn't want to build an L1, but we actually, we built the protocol first, which is the proof of creativity protocol, which is the set of smart contracts that regulate things like registering IP, like setting the license terms, like minting licenses, royalties, disputes, etc. And we wanted to deploy it on all different chains, but then we realized we need a single state for the IP to be composable, because if you want to remix multiple licenses or multiple IPs, you need to have a single IP graph. And so we tried to build an L2. We actually built an L2, and we deployed it, but we didn't announce it. And we realized that with an L2, we could only have up to like, practically up to 8 ancestors in the IP graph because of all of the checks that happen in a transaction up the tree. And so what we did is we built the L1 and enshrined the whole protocol on the L1. And the core part of the protocol is the programmable IP license. It's, oh yeah, here's some information on the network itself. So it's EVM execution. It's a pretty standard setup nowadays with Geth and Cosmos SDK. So you have best of both worlds. You have EVM, but leveraging Cosmos. A lot of modern chains are using this. Honestly, we don't care too much about the tech. As long as the tech works, it's good. If it ends up being a limitation, we'll just change it. We're not too married to the technology. What we do care about is the protocol. The protocol is the important part because, as I said, it encapsulates everything like royalties, licenses, etc. But the programmable IP license is what makes it powerful. Every single license term is codified and can be transacted on, can be coded on, can be conditioned. So like you can write code that checks conditions of the license terms. And then when you want, you can off-ramp those codified license terms to a legal document and vice versa. And then obviously authors can configure their license terms. I'm gonna go a bit faster. We're already front-running the ecosystem a lot. Obviously, in crypto, the most important thing is the ecosystem. And we're already working with a ton of projects. Obviously, if anyone wants to build on Story, come talk to me. But I just wanted to close with a couple examples. So this is Ablo. This is a project building on Story that is doing digital to physical fashion, where the fashion items can be personalized. And this is, for example, a Balmain shoe that the end user is personalizing, and once they finish personalizing it, they can share it on social media, they can get traction, and if they get enough traction, then Ablo will print or create a certain amount of these shoes, and the original artist will get a percentage. And this is great if it's this is already possible today. But what's powerful is another example, which is what happens if it's a cross application? So this is Magma, a company building on Story that has 3 million artists. It's a Web 2 company. What if after they finish working on an artwork, they go to register their work as IP, they set their license terms, and then that IP is registered and is accessible by anyone else, right? This is the Story hub. And someone else would come along and search for a character that they need for their story. They find this character, they mint a license permissionlessly without having to contact the original author, and they go and remix it. And let's say they want to build a comic, a web comic. First, they need to create various poses and variations of that character, right? So they would use an app like Mahojin, which is also building on Story, to generate different poses of this character that they got from the hub. They would pick all of the poses that they need for the webcomic, and then they can seamlessly transport it to Sekai, which is a web novel app that's building on Story. And they can create the character, they can create the webcomic. The important thing that I'm trying to show is not so much the apps themselves, which you can check out by yourself. It's the composability across applications, because once everything is published and there's monetization happening, everyone that was involved across the whole creative process has kickback, and all of that can be enforced and can be seamlessly done via the royalty tokens and the Story pipes, the pipelines that we've set up, so that you can pay back your dues regardless of how far down the IP graph you are, right? So I know that I'm out of time, so I'll stop here. But if you have questions about Story, come and talk to me outside, and thank you.